Hi, and welcome to the NVR podcast number 3. I'm Rachael Aylmer,
And I'm Peter Jakob.
and today we are talking about harmonizing or reconciliation. Do you want to say some more?
Well, Rachel, I was going to pick up on this conversation that the two of us had, a week or two ago. And you said something that I've become very curious about. You said that many of the parents you work with feel they need to make up very soon or right away after there's been an incident of aggressive behavior or, violence. Or some other sort of destructive event as a way of reconciling, and that it's important to make up very quickly. And I was just wondering whether you could say more about that.
Yeah, I think most recently, in the cases that I'm working with, that it's become, parents have become a little bit misplaced in that positioning. So they want to reach out to the child after a violent incident, and the reaching out is more about harmonizing,
Mm-hmm.
having and also I get the sense that they are confused with reconciling with the child, and but also there's a gap in how they feel that they can't tell their child that they're still upset or
Mm-hmm.
angry or hurt by the recent act, and sometimes feel parents can get lost in that process of losing that voice, that strong voice to say to the child, right now I am still really upset about what's just happened.
Mm-hmm.
Can we come back to this? I'll come back when I'm ready, just in a really lovely, neutral way. It hasn't got to be said with hostility or aggression. But I think some parents feel that in the work that I'm doing, that they need to reach out immediately. They need to um, reinstate that position of everything's fine, it's okay. You've just, thrown my Ming vase down the stairs and,
Mm-hmm.
punched your brother's head in. And I now, Rachel tells me I need to reconcile with you after an act. But actually, what they fail to share with me in sessions, it's only through, unpicking in that discussion that I said, how are you feeling when you reached out? You gave him a cup of tea. You went up to his room after that incident. Well, I was still feeling really angry, the mother might say, or the father might say, and okay, and it's almost that they feel they're not privileged to acknowledge their own feelings in amongst that. I've really waffled, but does that make sense?
Well, it makes absolute sense, and to me, you've kind of nailed it in that um, you've drawn a distinction between reconciliation and harmonizing, and they don't have to be the same thing. And I'm very familiar with the sense that many parents have, the belief that there needs to be harmony,
Mm,
um, even when they are still feeling very hurt.
yeah.
And often I come across parents who want to be child centered.
Mm,
So at a point when they are still hurt, upset, perhaps they're angry at the child, perhaps they feel humiliated, perhaps they're scared, perhaps
mm,
they're embarrassed because someone else has witnessed uh, an act of aggression. Um, Yet they tend to override those feelings in themselves, and
mm,
they believe that in order to be child centered, they have to now um, they have to now act in a way that is harmonious with the
mm,
child. And they end up doing things which they don't feel inclined to do yet. You know,
mm, mm,
let's go to the park. Okay, we'll go to the park. But actually, it's the body of the parent that goes to the park.
Mm,
inside, the parent is not yet ready to go to the park.
mm.
And I think that causes a lot of difficulties. I don't know what your take is on that.
Just thinking about the park, I remember a parent a long time ago said to me that she felt very disconnected with her son after an incident, and that she knew in her heart, leaving the home environment, he was a young under 10-year-old, but leaving the home environment and going to the park was something that she felt she needed to do. That was the connected part of her, that she wanted to spend some time with him out of the home. But her internal communication was that she'd rather stick a fork in her eye than take him to the park. And but actually the outcome of that was really wonderful, because she then went on to say that she did haul herself out of the house. She did struggle with connecting him on the walk to the park. When they arrived at the park, she did, push him on the swing with gritted teeth, yeah, you're having a good time, Johnny. But actually, as the time progressed, she then felt that she was able to leave some of the animosity behind. She was then able to make a deeper connection with the child. And by the time they got home, that whole discourse had changed, it had shifted. They were in a much nicer place. So there's something that can be quite rewarding about
Mhm,
going against the
mhm.
grain. But equally, I find parents that are doing it and can't make that shift during the time, going to the park, but actually they're still very much hurting, and they're not able to let that hurt go for another, few hours, or maybe even another couple of days. Um, and it's how can parents, uh, I guess it's not manualized NVR. It's what fits uniquely with you in the moment, and you might need longer to yourself.
Yeah.
There's all of those considerations. I think sometimes parents are, because of the violence, I feel sometimes they're instinctively stripped of their own thinking, of what they need to do next, because they're so traumatized by the patterns of behavior. I know, particularly I'm thinking of a parent I'm working with currently. Yeah.
I guess it brings us to the notion of rupture and repair in
Mm,
attachment theory, where um, there is an understanding that there will be ruptures in relationships. That's natural.
mm,
Trust builds not from the absence of rupture, but from the repair of rupture. And when a child cannot or cannot yet reach out to repair rupture, it must be the parent who does that.
mm,
And I think that's a very important understanding. At the same time, um, I often think about, well, how do parents go about repairing rupture when they act as if everything is okay when they are still upset
and hurt and
and
angry.
hurt and angry? Yeah. And what is the actual repair of the rupture? And is it realistic that acting as if nothing had happened can actually be an active repair in that situation? And does it not mean that they might cultivate a sense that any kind of tension between parent and child is unbearable?
Mm,
I remember when I grew up, I was always told that we must make up before going to bed.
yeah, me too.
You got that as well. And I think that instilled in me a sense that tension in the relationship is something terrible.
Mm,
And that it was a sort of an either or. Either we're all warm and cuddly with each other, or there is complete animosity. And for me, the reconciliation gesture, and many call it the relational gesture in NVR, seems to introduce the notion of both and.
mm,
You know,
mm,
I can make a small gesture at some point when I'm ready of reconciliation, and at the same time, I can communicate, I'm not ready yet. I'm not ready yet for a cuddle. I'm not ready to go to the theme park. But, I do want to show you that I recognize that there's much more to our relationship than this current moment of tension and disruption. And I think that both and is really valuable because the parent or the foster carer or the residential carer or whoever it is, or the teacher, in that moment is not pretending to feel in a way they don't feel.
Yeah, it's genuine.
It's genuine, it's authentic.
Authentic.
And by making a small gesture of reconciliation without prematurely harmonizing, I think they're giving the message it's okay for us to be somewhat at odds with each other, because this will also heal this rupture.
And it leads to child witnessing that change in his or her parent and regulating
Mm-hmm.
around that. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that to be genuine and authentic and to allow the child an opportunity to express yourself after an incident, I think the key bit is peacefully.
Mm.
I know that I have worked with some parents where we've talked about this, and so they'll say, oh right, okay, so I can let him know, and then what comes out is a lot of hostile aggression and
Yeah.
anger and more upset, more shame, and of course that's not what we're saying.
No.
so
No.
so that being genuine and authentic in self, communicating with the child that you are still hurt
Yeah.
and angry, but with capital letters, peacefully,
Yes.
non-violently.
And what you've also just indicated is using the first person.
Yeah,
I'm not ready yet. Not, oh, you are a terrible young
child.
person, terrible teenager, or whatever. It's, I'm not ready after what's just happened, and I need time. I need time. And actually, I think by being authentic and not suppressing, you know, their other more difficult feelings, by harmonizing falsely, the parent may actually be protecting the young person because they're regulating themselves emotionally much, much better. I think they're much more likely at some other point to erupt into anger, hostility, end up shaming the child when they have suppressed these difficult feelings and when they've gone for harmony too soon.
And that's so true. I recall a parent saying to me that she has absolutely no life, no privacy, no actions of her own. Her child just desperately needed her attention constantly, and so she couldn't even have an opportunity to create some space between herself and the child
Mhm.
to recover from the incidents, because the child just didn't let up. The child would just constantly follow the parent around. And what we talked about was that actually sometimes the child doesn't need to see that reconciliation. So we talked about how would it look when the child does finally fall asleep, that she could just sit on the end of the child's bed and give the child a kiss. So that it's that reconciliation that she's expressing to the child. The child hasn't received it because it's asleep, doesn't know the mother's there,
Mhm.
but she knows she was there, or he knows. And how does that then shift for her
Mhm.
when she can make gestures, physical gestures, to sit, touch the child's leg, stroke their head, give them a kiss on the forehead before they go to their own bed and retire for the evening? She knows that she did that. So in the morning, does she feel differently towards the child because she's made that physical gesture? So it's helping parents really think outside their own boxes. The child doesn't always necessarily need to see those gestures.
I'm intrigued by that, Rachel. It's an act of reconciliation of which the child is not even aware. And I was just wondering, to you, when you made that suggestion, was it about the fact that when the parent looks at the sleeping child, she is reminded of other facets of their child, rather than just the angry, aggressive, demeaning side of his behavior or her behavior?
Absolutely. Absolutely. What are we when we're asleep? We're
Mm,
peaceful. We we embody that, don't we? We're asleep, we're resting, we're peaceful, our breathing is, and she's not going to be refused because the
mm,
child can't refuse her because the child
mm.
is asleep. Um, so it's a win-win to find 5 minutes and sit with.
When
Mm.
she was sitting with her sleeping child, did she have the emotional response to that other side of her child that she then saw when her child was asleep? Did her feelings change at that moment?
She reported back that it was an act that she felt capable, and it was an act. What she saw was she said the words, "My child is more vulnerable.
Hmm.
They're sleeping. I'm here to protect her, to keep her safe at night." So she was able to tap into that, the
So
child's vulnerability.
she needed to see the vulnerability of the child in
Mm.
order to feel differently. How did
Yeah.
she feel in herself?
Um, this parent doesn't kind of talk much about how she's
Okay.
yeah. She just said that it was an act that she could do, that
But
she felt comfortable to do, and the child wasn't going to refuse her,
okay.
and that she saw her child in a peaceful, vulnerable
Yeah.
position, and she was able to kind of have that caring position as a mother.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. I was just thinking of someone else I've been working with, and I'll just call her mum,
Mm.
mum of a child who's grown up, who initially grew up in a different family. And the family he grew up in, people were not capable of repairing relational rupture. At least they didn't. He was often neglected. And the mum is very, very aware of his own history of developmental trauma. So much of her thinking has gone along the lines of, well, he can't help it.
Mm.
And I stumbled over a situation that she told me about where he had very savagely attacked her.
Mm.
And right after attacking her, she was saying, well, I wonder whether you did this because you were worried that I would reject you, and I wonder this and I wonder that. And then they went, that's why I came up with the park. They went to the park to play. And I just felt, hold on, this feels very quick, feels very fast.
Mm.
And I said, if you could, if you were in a video film and you're on your way to the park and we could just freeze the video film and you looked into yourself and you had a voice, what would your voice say? What's going on inside of you?
Mm.
And she said, that I'm hurting.
Mm.
And I said, what would the voice say about the child? And she said, oh, I don't want to tell you what the voice would say. um, so I said, so you don't have a positive feeling towards him. You don't have a positive image of him at this moment. She said, no, I'm very angry at him. So you're very angry at him. and at the same time you're forcing yourself to go to the park. Are you actually ready to go to the park yet? And she said, no, I'm not ready yet. And I said, what makes you do it? And she said, well, because of what he's gone through.
Mm.
So, and because he's so afraid of rejection. That's his biggest fear. And we talked about the fact that she has held on to him through thick and thin. So the fear of rejection is maybe his fear, and he often says things which indicate that he is afraid of rejection.
Mm.
But it's his fear. It's not anything to do with her. If anything, he may be provoking rejection by the degree of his aggression. So she decided she was going to not harmonize until she felt ready to harmonize.
Mm.
And we discussed an act of reconciliation which she could make while at the same time telling the child, I'm not ready yet. I'm not ready to go to the park. And actually, I need some time on my own. I'm not even ready to talk yet. Yet she gave him a small gift. I can't remember what it was. And we followed this up over 2 or 3 sessions. And something really remarkable happened. And
Mm.
I can't know whether it's causal or not. But actually, he stopped talking about getting rejected by her. So he seemed to become more sure or assured within himself that he's safe with her.
Mm.
And I've been thinking about this a lot, and I've been trying to make sense of this. I'm not sure I can quite make sense of it, but it, like so often in work with NVR, the opposite of what one worries often seems to happen.
Yeah, common. I'm just thinking about that mum's what changed in her communication, in the way she looked and held herself, and how she maybe spoke, what her tone of voice. I'm been doing some having some peer supervision with a colleague who's been sharing some of her practice with a client, and her child had been sleeping in her bed for many years, and the mother didn't want the child in her bed, but hadn't felt strong enough to change any of that. And with her work with one of our associates, she found the strength to change that, and celebrated in her next session, telling her practitioner that she'd spent the last 4 nights on her own in her own bed,
Mm,
and her child in her bed. The child still disapproved, and the child
mhm,
still made lots of noise, but
mhm,
there was so much change in this mother's position, her strength, her voice, her positioning, her determination, her being able to say to the child, no, this
mhm.
isn't happening. And I think sometimes it's just having that opportunity for parents to think about their own positioning and their own communication with the child that makes these shifts. Now this child is sleeping in her own bed, but for years and years she wasn't. She was in her mother's bed, but this cycle, this pattern. So I guess there are many changes, isn't there, in our work with families, and sometimes I'm baffled as to why that change has taken place. But for parents, I think the strongest part is for parents to find their inner voice and their strength, and have the confidence to communicate that with their child, that enough is enough, that I'm not sleeping in the same bed as you, or I'm hurt by this anger, I'm hurt and I'm angry about the recent incidences. How parents can communicate that.
I'm just putting myself in that little girl's place, or trying to.
Hmm.
And I'm imagining that I have managed to make my mother allow me to stay in her bed. But what's the price that I'm paying?
Mm.
And the price that I'm paying is that even if on the outside she is accepting of me being there,
Mm.
I imagine I can tell by her body language, by her facial expression, by something in the tone of her voice, feelings she can't suppress,
Mm.
those feelings that speak to me through my mother's body language and that I absorb implicitly.
Mm.
I notice implicitly, I'm not thinking about them, but somehow her body communicates it to my emotion
Mm.
that I'm lying there and not fully wanted there.
Mm.
And I'm thinking that could wreak a lot of damage emotionally
Mm.
to me. So I'm just thinking of the one I just spoke to you about, the boy who is no longer indicating so much fear of rejection. And I'm just thinking of the security, the emotional security that may be growing from knowing where he's at.
Mm.
And that when his mum makes an NVR reconciliation gesture, he knows she means that.
Yeah.
And he knows that there's still tension and she's not suppressing those difficult feelings in herself. But
Mm.
there's also an assuredness she will come out of that, and later there will be harmony between us again. And then when there is harmony, it's genuine. There's nothing that she's holding back or suppressing.
Yeah.
I'm just imagining how that gives greater safety.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay, Rachel, should we just reflect a little bit on the conversation that we've just had?
Yeah, I think for me, what struck me is that there is, as parents, we forget how important our positions are with our children, and actually how incredibly insightful and intuitive our children can be,
Mm.
and the nuances they can pick up on, the tiny minuscule face movement that, when the child asks, can they do something, and the parent doesn't really want it, but they're just doing it because they're in fear of the child's reactions. And then it's helpful for parents to think sometimes that those reactions aren't always, the child's reactions aren't always, that they are picked up on. The child can sense the parents' either resistance or hostility or discourse, however they might see it. Yeah.
I'm just
Mm.
thinking that a parent who is not yet ready to harmonize and makes it clear to their child, but makes it clear in the way that you've outlined, that is not
Mm.
hostile, that is not blaming,
Mm.
that parent is not rejecting their child. They are merely being authentic, congruent, and actually, because of that authenticity, providing the child possibly with a greater sense of security.
Yeah, totally.
And that the reconciliation gesture is almost like a little pointer to the future. Okay, right now things are difficult between us, but it won't always stay that way.
Mm. Okay. Thank you for listening to our fortnightly podcast, and we will be launching another one in 2 weeks. Take care. Bye.
Bye.